Aggression. Sometimes it's a faulty veil that deeply blinds a person and causes them to act recklessly. But in other instances, it's the perfect tactic used to capture victory by attempting to strike hard and fast right out of the gate before your opponent has adequate time to prepare their defenses. It's a formula as old as time, and highly aggressive strategies have been successful throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! History time and time again. In this video, you'll learn about one of my favorites, an absolute flash in the pan that came, saw, and conquered, but then bizarrely disappeared without a trace just as quickly as it arrived. This video is all about the Shonen Jump Championship winning Bazoo-Return deck. Despite this deck's run taking place during GX, I'm actually going to begin in the DM era. On March 1st, 2003, the Labyrinth of Nightmare Core booster set was released in the TCG, and inside of it, 2 cards that would become incredibly potent right out of the gate. Unfortunately, for the wrong reasons. These cards were of course Bazoo the Soul Eater, where this deck gets part of its name from, and the other was Skull Layer, both of which revolved around banishing monsters from your graveyard for powerful effects. Bazoo was a level 4, 1600 attack Earth Beast monster. Just decent stats at first glance, but its effect allowed you to supercharge those. Bazoo could banish up to 3 monsters from your grave to gain 300 attack for each. Now you're talking. With this powerful effect, Yu-Gi-Oh! Had a level 4 monster that could reach an incredible 2500 attack the second it hit the field. Not only that, but that attack gain lasted until the end of your opponent's turn. So your opponent would need generally either a powerful equip spell or nothing short of a boss monster to bring down that Bazoo. Skull Layer was very similar, being a continuous trap that let players banish any number of monsters from their grave to destroy a monster whose level was equivalent to the amount banished. What made Skull Layer nice was its value. It being a continuous trap meant that it had potential for multiple activations of the card. Also, it wasn't once per turn, so it was very possible, and even sometimes likely, to nuke multiple monsters in a single turn to stop big pushes. Around the time when Labyrinth of Nightmare premiered, filling up the graveyard with monsters wasn't exactly an easy thing to do. However, on the initial release, both cards were actually misprinted to say remove cards rather than remove monsters. So ironically, for a short while, Bazoo and Skull Layer were both insanely strong competitive cards. It should be obvious why, but duelists would often just banish their powerful spell and trap cards for those crazy potent effects. Once Upper Deck realized their mistake, however, they instantly errated both cards, and sadly their meta play fell off a cliff. Banishing wasn't a very big part of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! During DM. Outside of the staple juggernaut of DD Warrior Lady, post-Invasion of Chaos was really the only time where you saw players build entire strategies around banishing cards. During the GX era, this was taken to another level. The legendary multiple-time Shonen Jump Championship winning Chaos Return deck was a prime example of just how deadly decks focused around this strategy could be. It wasn't just using the graveyard to summon meta-defining boss monsters like Chaos Sorcerer, which was ultimately so powerful he'd end up banned, but summoning all your banished monsters back to the field at once using a single card like Dimension Fusion or Return from the Different Dimension usually meant instant victory if not stopped. Decks like Diamond Dew Turbo and Chaos Return are fairly well known. However, the short-lived Bazoo-Return, sometimes referred to as Bazooper, could be just as explosive. Built from the ground up by Team Scoop, which featured 2 soon-to-be Shonen champions in Paul Leviton and Shane Scurry, Team Scoop not only prided themselves on building wild and original decks, but they also thought outside the box when it came to their strategies. This was the Bazoo-Return deck that Paul Leviton took to Shonen Jump Los Angeles, held on the weekend of November 19, 2005. While the playset of Bazoo the Soul Eaters and Returns may immediately stand out as the core themes of the deck, what might not is just how much this deck played to Team Scoop's then ideology of forced simplicity. Forced simplicity was trying to exchange or trade cards with your opponent as quickly as possible to simplify the game state ASAP. Cards like Exiled Force, DD Warrior Lady, and DD Assailant accomplished this perfectly. All monsters that could easily take down an opponent's monster with them. The spell lineup accomplished this as well, with Triple Smashing Ground, Dark Hole, and Nobleman of Crossout. Lastly, there was the Trap Brigade, a playset of Sakuretsu Armor, a Widespread Ruin, Bottomless Trap Pole, and Torrential Tribute were all removal options during the opponent's turn. The Force Simplicity wasn't done without a purpose. It was used to quickly boil the game down to top deck wars in which Team Scoop members would have huge and decisive advantages. Paul Leviton and his teammate Carlos Santiago, who used nearly the same deck at the event, would be top decking powerhouses like Bazoo the Soul Eater, which as previously mentioned, could jump up to 2500 attack and be fully capable of taking down a Cyber Dragon or even a Monarch. Or they could get something like Return from the Different Dimension that could just end the game by itself. On the other side, their opponent would be drawing cards like Monarchs that they might not be able to even summon. In this instance, the Team Scoop members would be able to quickly end the game instantly or within the matter of a couple of turns. Many disregarded this strategy when multiple members of the relatively unknown team had breakout performances at the previous Shonen Jump Championship, pondering why forcibly exchange cards with the opponent when you could just take advantageous trades. However, the flaw in that logic lies in the fact that you're assuming that you'll always be able to do so, or that your opponent will give you the time necessary. At Shonen Jump Los Angeles, Paul Leviton proved that this wasn't just good Yu-Gi-Oh! Theory, as he went completely undefeated over the weekend en route to his very first Shonen Jump Championship. At the quarterfinals, he dominated Kirk Leonhardt. One of the more notable plays in this duel is when Paul activated Heavy Storm, which prompted Kirk to chain Emergency Provisions, attempting to get some value from his set cards. Paul chained Return from a Different Dimension to summon a small army of monsters back. After taking out Kirk's GOAT tokens and getting in a 2500 direct attack with Bazoo the Soul Eater, he tributed his Exile Force to destroy his own Sangan and then search DD Warrior Lady for his next turn. It was actually a pretty solid play as he was going to lose both monsters in the end phase anyways. Paul actually ended up dodging his teammate Carlos Santiago, who made it to the semifinals, once again playing almost an identical deck to Paul. Leviton would then go on to defeat Angel Flores in the finals of this Shonen Jump Championship, which was actually Paul's third straight 2-0 victory on the day. The interesting thing is, despite Team Scoop's absolute domination of Los Angeles over that weekend, that saw them once again put a duelist in the semifinals, as well as win the event in undefeated fashion, the Bazoo-Return deck basically disappeared. At next month's Shonen Jump San Francisco, not a single player in the top cut used the strategy. Same ban list, same metagame, and yet gone without a trace. In fact, it would be nearly a year and a half into the deck's triumphant re-emergence as Chaos Return dominated a good portion of the upcoming 2006 year. This time around, it would come at the hands of quite possibly the most dominant TCG duelist of the entire GX era, Iman Ganin. Already being a two-time Shonen Jump champion at this point, Iman was no stranger to high-level play and was constantly surrounded by some of the best minds in North America. This included Paul Leviton and Shane Scurry, formerly of Team Scoop, who by this time had joined Iman's team Overdose. Shane Scurry had actually used Bazoo-Return at Shonen Jump Orlando, which took place in late January 07. He just missed out on making the top 8 of the event. However, Iman must have taken a liking to the deck, seeing its latent potential and explosiveness. Dimension Fusion was moved to limited status on the May 2007 ban list, but that was no issue at all. Iman fine-tuned the deck and played what I personally believe is the most explosive version of Bazoo-Return the game had ever seen. The legendary Matt Petal once wrote about a theory he had in which he subscribed to the idea that aggressive decks often held an advantage during the early stages of a format. This was because the slower-paced ones didn't yet know what to attempt to counter. Shonen Jump Houston, Texas was the first major TCG event of the March 2007 format, and Iman Ganin used a deck specifically designed to take advantage of that theory. What you're looking at is essentially Bazoo-Return 2.0, faster, sleeker, and much more explosive. Obviously, Iman maxed out on the namesake Bazoo the Soul Eater to get monsters banished ASAP. but this time around, multiple copies of Skull Layer were also included. Skull Layer was top-notch utility as it could pop opposing monsters, be used multiple times, fueled return plays, and even in rare instances could be used on Iman's own monsters to help him dodge cards like Brain Control, Soul Exchange, and Enemy Controller. I'd also like to point out that if Iman destroyed his own Card Trooper, which was also played at 3 in this deck, he'd draw a card and wouldn't lose advantage. Speaking of which, the playset of Card Trooper as well as Magical Merchants were one of the main reasons why this build was much faster than Levitans from Los Angeles. Trooper was easily a top 3 monster in the entire game during 2007, and its power was insane. In Bazoo-Return, you weren't just getting a solid offensive monster who also floated, but those mills were used to fuel things like Skull Layer and Bazoo. Magical Merchant also turbocharged getting monsters into the graveyard fast, and benefited from the fact that this deck ran multiple flip monsters ranging from Gravekeeper Spy to Morphing Jar. Basically, your opponent couldn't just recklessly attack in the face downs for fear of some serious punishment. While the DD monsters were still fantastic, Iman ditched those for the new hot monster on the block, Snipe Hunter. Prior to being limited to 1, Snipe Hunter was everywhere around this time. In this deck, he was basically a faster removal option that didn't rely on the battle phase to get cards off the field. Snipe could easily deal with back row and multiple cards in a turn. There were also the pretty basic but highly effective plays of dumping boss monsters like D-Mok and Jinzo into the grave and then reborning them with Premature Burial and Call of the Haunted. On the note of explosive plays, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Iman's inclusion of Future Fusion in this deck. And oh yes, we're talking the OG unerrated Future Fusion, the stupidly broken version of this card. Future Fusion allowed Iman the ability to instantly dump every machine monster in his entire deck into the graveyard at once. He would then usually banish Jinzo and other machines with Skull Layer or Bazoo, then return them all back and threaten lethal damage with a gigantic push. Always summoning back Jinzo not only played around defensive cards, but that tin can was often accompanied by Cyber Phoenix, whose spot in this deck was actually quite genius. Phoenix didn't explode in popularity during 2007 for no reason. For what the card lacked in offense, it definitely made up for in utility. A floating effect when destroyed by battle, and just as useful, it gave targeting protection for your other machines. So not only were your opponent's Brain Control and Soul Exchange taken off the table, but those annoying defensive quick play spells like Book of Moon and Econ, aka cards that Jinzo didn't cover, weren't options either. This deck was made to be fast, adaptable, and definitely explosive. The semifinals of Houston displayed just that. In a match versus Steven Reyes and his Monarch control deck, the first game was super grindy. Honestly, Iman probably had no business winning it. However, the defensive monsters like Gravekeeper Spy kept him in by a thread. Steven fought off Iman's first return OTK attempt with Torrential Tribute, but about 5 turns later his second attempt succeeded and Iman was able to win in a single turn. Game 2 was far less in question as Iman jumped on Steven right out of the gate with Cyber Dragon and Snipe Hunter for some quick damage after discarding Jinzo. Iman would swiftly end the game just 2 turns later using that same Jinzo and Snipe Hunter with the Bazoo-powered Dimension Fusion Mega Push. Iman then went on to beat his own teammate Chris Pervik in the finals in another 2-0 commanding win to capture his 3rd Shonen Jump title and a copy of the all-world powerful Crush Card Virus Shonen Jump prize card. For the second time, and in a completely different metagame, heck, a completely different year for that matter, the Bazoo-Return deck stood atop competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! The strange, although ironic thing was, history repeated itself, pretty much to a T. The amazing performance became just another one-hit wonder as Bazoo-Return would go on to make one more top 16 at a Shonen Jump, but then fall off the planet and out of the metagame completely. To be honest, I still can't fully explain this. Yes, Iman Ganin was one of the very best players in the TCG at the time, but Bazoo-Return was legitimately a great deck. It wasn't like it was a slouch and he was just carrying it to victories. So for it to go from champion to chump basically in a flash is still very bizarre to me. I will say this, the March 2007 format in my opinion was easily the most fascinating in TCG history, as we had 9 Shonen Jump championships and 8 different decks win those championships. So I guess you could honestly say that Bazoo-Return going on a dynamic run just was never in the cards, because there really weren't repeat champions in that format. And with that, we are at the conclusion of this Yu-Gi-Oh story. If you enjoyed the video, or more importantly, you learned something, give the video a thumbs up, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and check out the other stories I think you'll enjoy that are on the screen right now. Thanks for watching. And as always, a big thank you to my patrons, my old buddy Garen Williams, Brian Ford, Volnuff, Israel Davis, Ernesto Sanchez, and the Twitch crew, Akinasism, Big Pimpin', and Super Canadian. If you'd like to consider supporting me on Patreon, the link as always is in the description below.